Hi, James Proctor here. We're back with part 2 of robotic process automation. And in part 2 here, we're going to deal with identifying opportunities in your organization for RPA. And we'll dip a little bit into the concept of maybe analyzing those opportunities just a little bit to help us identify opportunities. Then in part 3, we're going to talk about the role of people versus the role of technology. So let's just go ahead and hop right into content here and see where it takes us. Okay, just to set that framework again. So we think about an organization, right? Just to set some context here, we think about the vertical part of the organization, right? The reporting relationships. We think about the business process layer as well. And so where robotic process automation fits in is, I call it splitting the atom of the work activities. We take a particular activity in a business process workflow, right? Maybe we're going to enter an order or we're going to set up an account and we get to a particular activity, but any activity in the workflow, we're really asking the question, what portion of the activity is rules-based, mechanical rules-based work, and what portion is knowledge and judgment-based work? Because that portion of any work activity, and that's where RPA fits in, any portion of a work activity that's knowledge, that's rules-based, right? Mechanical rules-based, that's where RPA fits in. All right. So that's what we're going to be talking about here is how to identify those opportunities for automation and a little bit about how to think about them in terms of analyzing them just a little bit. All right. Here's the concept. An activity or a particular activity, business process, is a good candidate for RPA if it meets 4 criteria. All right. Criteria involves manual work. We're doing some manual work, right? Now, when I talk about manual work, I'm not talking about maybe unloading a truck kind of manual work. I'm talking about manual work in the context of you doing workflow kind of work, right? Maybe we're going to enter an order, or we're checking customer credit, or we're going to create an invoice. That's what I mean. So we're interacting with systems, and interacting with systems, we're doing as a human some manual interaction with that particular system. So it involves manual work. It's rules-based, right? So we're doing manual work and we're doing things, but we can distill that down to a set of rules. The set of rules is structured. I mean, it's not only a set of rules, but it's a procedural set of rules. We do this and we do this and we do this and we do this. And it's repetitive in nature, right? I call it banging out the widgets, right? We create an invoice, then we create another invoice, then we create another invoice, or we're going to, whatever it is, onboard a new customer, or we're going to check credit, whatever it is. If it's a repetitive kind of work, rules-based, these kinds of things, it's a good candidate to further evaluate for RPA. Now, just because it meets that criteria, though, we're going to look at the value proposition. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later in this section. But BPA reduces labor costs. So if it involves manual work, and we can replace that manual work or a portion of it with RPA, right? So we can reduce some labor costs. Will prevent human error. If it's manual work, there's typically it's tedious, repetitive, ongoing. There's going to be some human errors, right? Speeds time to value. Generally, a human can only work at a certain speed when they're entering an invoice or moving, copying, and pasting data and so on. The bots can do it extraordinarily fast. So we get the process down, compress that process cycle time as well. And so I'll talk a little later, in particular in part 3, rebalances the workforce time. Because as we reduce that human labor component, all right, not only reducing the human labor component but we can of that particular activity, but we can repurpose that amount of human labor time to do something maybe perhaps a little more higher value kinds of work. Okay, so that's kind of the way to think about it. It fits this criteria and it's able to create value in these particular ways. And many, many other ways we'll talk about later in this section. All right, so just some just a wide variety here. I think we're going to look at 8 examples of RPA opportunities here. Email processing was probably one of the original use cases of RPA. All of us have a lot of email coming in, and we sort through it, we classify it in certain emails. Maybe we could look at it and say, maybe this is better performed by somebody else, or maybe this portion of the email, there's some information we can copy here and paste over there, or do something with the system. But you just think about your whole world of processing emails. Now, yes, things like Microsoft Outlook, right? You could build some macros and do some basic, we talked about in that last section, if it's a kind of utility like Excel or Outlook or any of the utilities. That's not, yes, you can write macros, but that's not what we're talking about. RPA. RPA is really, it's outside the box of a particular application, but it works with the application to do certain things. And email, there's a tremendous amount of sophisticated things you can do with bots in connection with processing email. Another example here. Let's see. Fraud detection, account suspension, right? Basically, credit card companies are looking for patterns of behavior, and a lot of that's just very rules-based, right? Yes, some of it is AI-based, but a lot of it's just rules-based. Certain types of transactions over a certain amount, maybe we had a transaction in maybe one geographic location, and 5 minutes later we had the same transaction in another geographic location. Maybe you get the concept. So, or maybe over limits, under limits, don't matter. But there's a lot of rules-based work that could be performed by the RPA bots in terms of detection and account suspension and things like that. All right. So just pause here for just a second, let you to read those paragraphs a little bit more, and then we'll move on to the next set. All right. So we've got a couple more here. Call center support. The concept of call center support is a call comes in. Right, the call router can pick up the caller ID. Based on that call, we know who the caller is. Then it starts populating screens for the human operator, the call center agent, to work with. So it's not replacing the call center agent in this particular use case. But the concept is it brings up the customer profile, maybe the last 5 or 10 transactions. It brings up a whole suite of information based on an inbound caller. And so now that inbound caller agent is immediately able to do a good job of servicing that call. Right, another example here. Let's see here. Forms data entry. I'd say this is one of the, currently one of the most compelling use cases as well. Just anything that involves manual data entry. And what I mean, we're probably not getting forms coming in for a fax machine anymore, certainly. So I don't mean that kind of form data entry, but probably information is coming in, probably maybe through some, online transaction kind of things. Maybe we're entering in another system, and some of that has to be entered into another system in order to do the billing and things like that. So anytime we're processing forms, and I'm talking about electronic forms now here really, or scan forms and things like that, and doing data entry based on that, it's a fantastic use of RPA. New employee onboarding. Now, new employee onboarding is a very complicated process and a set of processes and tasks and procedures and things like that. So business process automation and orchestration can do a good job of helping end-to-end. But in the RPA things, we're talking about some of the more straightforward activity-based kinds of things, maybe a username, a password access, facility access things, some issuing a laptop or a cell phone, other tasks that are kind of dependent and run in parallel. So those simple kind of things that are very rules-based, but we can do very quickly with RPA. Credit analysis, much of that is rule-based as well. Yes, artificial intelligence is in that area as well, but a lot of credit analysis is still very rules-based, right? We take a person's, maybe we're filling out a credit app, it takes a person's social security number, address, a few things like that, goes out to the credit reporting bureau, pulls down the credit report, looks for various things. I mean, it's really, if you've ever gone recently to an auto dealership, I don't know, in the last even 4 or 5 years or so, you fill out a credit report, you usually get a credit verification and decision, back within minutes, less than a minute sometimes, right? It's just all automated now, right? Or a significant portion of it is automated. Data migration, certainly. Here's some IT examples. Data migration. Yes, there's some fantastic ETL tools out there, very sophisticated tools for data migration, but maybe in your particular organization or for your particular needs, you're not going to spend that kind of money and that kind of technology, right? So some basic, extraction, transformation, load kinds of things. We've got to move some data from one place to another. Maybe, I'll go to the next one here because it's related to that. We have to cleanse the data along the way, and we have to standardize it in some way. Maybe we're taking data from multiple systems. We have to standardize it in a certain type of format. It's pretty mechanical. Type of things. It's very mechanical. Great use of RPA bots. Password resets, obviously, pretty straightforward thing to do based on some rules. Compliance, detecting, maybe just scanning, PCs and looking for certain compliance kinds of things that have to do with maybe certain software that's been loaded or things like that. Very, very common use of RPA today. Some basic ITSM, ITIL kinds of processes, right? Software, not software, but IT services as a service, if you will. Now, there's some fantastic software out there for doing ITIL kinds of services at an organization. But before you, maybe in some organizations, maybe you don't need some of the software out there. There's some great tools out there, but maybe you want to just do, you don't have those kinds of needs at the enterprise level, so maybe we use RPA to do some of those kinds of things as well. So a lot of opportunities in the world of IT. All right. So let's talk about some value drivers real quick. All right? At the very beginning of this section, I listed 2 or 3, but let's go a little bit deeper, right? So we start off by saying it's got to be rules-based, it's got to be repetitive, it's got to be manual labor, right? Distilled down to a procedure. Those are sort of the markers for things to look at that say, here's some potential opportunities for RPA. But we have to overlay that by saying, okay, now, what's the value drivers? What value drivers imply and what value can we get at it? So it might be that, in many cases we can get tremendous value. Maybe they meet that criteria of being an opportunity, but maybe the value drivers just don't pencil out. So here's some things to look at. All right. Well, the first things to look at is reduction in labor hours. It's just that simple. If we ought, how much of that is a manual versus how much of the manual work involved in a particular work activity can replace through automation? Right. And that's a pretty objective thing to look at. Reduction in errors and improved quality of the output. Just that simple, right? If it's manual, repetitive, rules-based, right? But we're doing it manually, right? All of us, human actors are subject to errors in keystrokes, errors in these kinds of things. Nothing malicious I'm talking about here. It's just, the bots, they don't make those kinds of rule-based errors, right? It improves the quality of output and these kinds of things. Right? And I'll just kind of pause between those just to give you a little time to read the more detail there. Reduction in process duration, end-to-end cycle time. Right? It's amazing. I mean, you can get 4, 5, even 10 to 1 reductions in end-to-end cycle time if it's rules-based, repetitive, procedural-based. A bot can process that kind of work very, very quickly, far faster than a human can. Right? There's certain limits to human performance in terms of speed and quality and things like that. The bots just grind it out extremely fast. Right? Reduction in tedious, repetitive, monotonous work. Now, why is that important? Well, if we reduce tedious work, improves staff satisfaction, morale, reduces turnover, right? It allows people to maybe upgrade their skills. This real learning and growth opportunity to move away from that repetitive, tedious work to maybe some more sophisticated kind of work, right? Improves customer satisfaction, both internal and external. Whatever that RPA automation is doing, it's doing it faster than a human can do it. It can do it higher quality, higher speed, these kinds of things, that time to value kind of issue. So we get faster internal turnaround, faster customer turnaround. So it really improves that customer satisfaction as well. Improved adherence to internal and regulatory compliance. It's a very big deal these days. And bots follow script. Bots are doing rules-based things. Bots don't kind of wander off and do other things, right? They just don't, right? And so why is that important? So when you have a compliance audit, in today's world, a compliance audit, if you can show them, you show them the scripts, you demonstrate how the scripts do the thing that they're supposed to be doing, and it actually speeds up compliance audits to the extent that you're using the RPA bots. It's very quickly to show that they're in compliance, and they not only are in compliance, they're consistently in compliance with things. So it helps that as well. Potential data security. The concept of there's really what are called front-end bots and back-end bots. Front-end bots, or sometimes the back-end bots, are called headless bots. But the point is certain things that involve data transfer, particularly if they involve personally identifiable information, that can be done in the background. So instead of a human copying, pasting, entering information that could potentially be personally identifiable or sensitive information, the bots can do it, right? The bots aren't looking at the data, at least cognitively, like we look at data, right? So it does improve data security from that perspective, for sure. And on and on and on. There's other things as well. But at the kind of the 80-20 approach, this handful of bullet points here account for about 95% of the value you're going to get through RPA. All right. So we look at the things that are candidates for automation from just the repetitive rules-based. We look at the value proposition. It gives us a good way of kind of sizing up the opportunity for bots. At least we call the initial assessment stage, right? We go a lot deeper, in the world of RPA and business cases and the analysis, but this gives you a quick kind of thumbnail way of doing it very quickly. at least in the initial assessment. Now, the other thing we want to talk about here is to also look for what I call hurdles to automation. And I use the word hurdles, not showstoppers, right? Again, we want to just identify these and take them into account and then think about how we can overcome them if we need to. Now, judgment-based decision-making. If it's true judgment-based decision-making, right, that's not in the realm of automation yet. We'll talk about that in part 3 a little bit. But the point is, bots are very good. They can bring information together. They can help augment decision-making, but they really don't replace human decision-making yet in complex, judgment-based kind of thinking, right? So if you have that kind of activity, there's probably some lower-hanging fruit you can go after first before going after that, but you just got to be aware of that and analyze it in detail. Fuzzy logic, right? Bots are very good at applying rules. They're not very good at applying fuzzy logic, meaning, the preponderance of information, I've got this, and I've got this, and I've got this. I'm going to choose between 3 things, and the preponderance of information says maybe I do this, but I know some other factor, that's kind of, more in that realm of, it just doesn't handle fuzzy thinking very well, deciding not from a rules-based standpoint, but from a knowledge and judgment and standpoint, yes or no kind of things. It doesn't handle fuzzy logic very well. Solving CAPTCHA scenarios. All right? Most of you, I'm sure all of you have experienced CAPTCHA scenarios. You're logging into some system, and it could be an app on your phone, or it could be an application on your PC, logging into some third-party app that you need to get into to do something. Sometimes they present a CAPTCHA scenario, right? You got to solve a problem, right? And they're getting more and more sophisticated, if you've noticed. Now, why are they getting these CAPTCHA scenarios getting more and more sophisticated? It's like an arms race, right? They're trying to fool the bots, right? Or not fool the bots. They're trying to forestall the bots from logging in, and they want the humans to log in for various things because of, the bots can do certain things and do things quick, and they can be malicious and things like that for certain systems, right? So the point is, the bots aren't very good at solving CAPTCHA scenarios yet, but they get better, and then the CAPTCHA scenarios get better. And I was looking at a CAPTCHA scenario that was really even hard to solve for a human. Not that it was, from a cognitive standpoint, hard to solve, but just looking at it, I had to put on my glasses and I had to open the screen a little brighter because it says, well, okay, which shadow is the wrong shadow based on a certain object? I mean, that was a pretty sophisticated CAPTCHA scenario. So now, that said, and a lot of times, in a RPA type of implementation, you have to log into certain systems, maybe internal systems, maybe external systems, maybe a credit reporting system or some vendor system do something. Doesn't matter. You have to log into third-party systems. And so the CAPTCHA scenarios do create a barrier to that. Now, if you're working with something ongoing, it's a vendor or some type of system you're working on a regular basis, and you're paying, particularly if you're paying a fee or subscription to do that, generally those vendors will expose a web service API interface kind of thing, and so you have to bring the technical people in to work with the bot to be able to log in through, and they probably build an API for the bot to log into, and that's how you typically overcome very sophisticated CAPTCHA scenarios. OCR. Now, what I mean by OCR, optical character recognition, is extremely sophisticated these days, but right, if you're scanning a form like a PDF or whatever, if you're scanning some type of form and you're letting optical character recognition infer from that form what the characters are and using that to populate a particular electronic form, right? That's fine, using the bot to do that, but it's you got to build some other safeguards on it as well, because the bots, the OCR scans aren't always get the numbers right. The bots don't always recognize those, so you have to build some validation checks into the bots, right? And handwritten notes and documents are particularly problematic, right? It's getting better and better all the time, but still, if you're scraping data off of scans, you just got to be aware of that. A selection of date ranges, right? Maybe a particular step in a particular activity in a particular procedure says, well, select a range of dates. You want to know this from this date to this date or this date to this date. The bot by itself is probably not going to know that unless it has other context by which to infer that. So just be aware of that. Unstructured data, right? not database data is easy, right? It's database data. We can grab from this database and this database and this database and do our extraction. That's bots can do that beautifully, right? But unstructured data, looking at a form, looking at a Word doc, looking at things that there's data in there, and as a human we can infer what the data is. The bots still, it's continually evolving, but unstructured data is probably not your. Probably there's some lower hanging fruit to go after first before you start dealing with unstructured data. Dependencies on systems outside, inside, and external to the system. So maybe that bot is working with multiple systems, right? And one of the particular systems, IT releases a new version or upgrade or something in a particular system, and we've moved maybe a certain button over here, and we maybe changed a field over there, and from a user interface standpoint. And the bots aren't going to go out and read release notes. I guess they could, but I haven't seen that done yet. But so anytime there's a release of a new system, and that involves a little bit of change, because humans can adapt real quickly. They go, the submit button's here versus there, or this form has changed a little here, and it's fine, right? But the bots don't have that kind of inferential capability yet. So if there's a new release of a system and that system impacts the user interface, probably going to have to revise there's a good chance you're going to have to revise the script. So just some things to look at there, be aware of. So we've got the basic markers. What's a good bot? What are the characteristics of a potential opportunity? What are some of the value drivers and maybe some of the hurdles to look at? And those three components really in an early, quick initial assessment gives you kind of a thumbnail that says, all right, this is probably a good candidate, right? Good value. This here, maybe a lesser candidate. Maybe we'll kind of defer that to a later time. Okay, so just to kind of recap the concept here, right? It's a candidate. I shouldn't say necessarily good opportunity. We have to dig in deeper, but it's a candidate for automation if it involves manual work, right? When I say manual work, we're talking about interacting with the system work, not loading a truck kind of work, but it involves interacting with the system manually. It's rules-based. Right? It's structured procedure, follows rules, and it does it in a procedural way. And it's repetitive in nature. I'd say take a deeper look at that. Now, in addition to that, take a deeper look at it and say, well, what's the business value? And here are just some of them. We looked at a lot more of them here in the prior slides. Then also maybe we'll calibrate that with some of the hurdles as well. And that'll give you a quick initial thumbnail of how to think about the concept of maybe this is a good opportunity for automation. Okay, so in part one, we laid the foundation. Here in part two, with the information you have right now, right, you can do a pretty quick assessment of your business processes. Fits those characteristics we've talked about. Some are going to be, good candidates, good value drivers. Some maybe less candidates, less valuable candidates because maybe you have some hurdles to overcome. Maybe the value drivers aren't there. But I think you have a good set of starter tools to go look at that. Now, in part three, what I'm going to talk about is the role of people in the versus the role of technology in today's workforce. And it's a good discussion. Gives and actually will take the edge off it a little bit because there's a clear role for people. There's a clear role for technology. It's continually changing a little bit, but we'll look at those factors, and it's a lot of fun. So I'll see you in part three, and see you there.